Blake Shelton walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage that night with his signature swagger, boots polished, denim crisp, and that easy Oklahoma grin lighting up the studio. The crowd erupted in applause as he waved, his guitar slung casually over his shoulder. It had been a while since Blake had done a live late-night interview, and the energy in the room buzzed with anticipation. He looked relaxed, every bit the country superstar fans loved, charming, grounded, and never afraid to laugh at himself. Jimmy Kimmel stood to greet him, shaking his hand warmly. "Ladies and gentlemen, the man who has somehow convinced Gwen Stefani to live on a farm, Blake Shelton." The host joked, earning loud laughter. Blake chuckled, tipping his cowboy hat in good humor. The interview started off smoothly, full of banter and jokes. They talked about The Voice, about how Blake missed his fellow judges, and about how weird it was not being on TV every week. Jimmy teased, "So what's retirement from The Voice like? Are you just sitting on your porch yelling at deer now?" Blake laughed. "Pretty much, yeah, except the deer listen better than Adam Levine ever did." The audience roared, and for a few minutes, it felt like classic Blake, relaxed, funny, and completely in control. Then, as the laughter began to die down, Jimmy shifted gears. He picked up a blue card from his desk and grinned mischievously. "So Blake," he began, "there's been some interesting stories floating around about you. Apparently, you've been known to enjoy a drink or two before going on stage. Any truth to that?" The crowd laughed, waiting for Blake's response. He smiled tightly, adjusting his hat. "You mean, like, ever in my life? I'm a country singer, Jimmy. That's kind of part of the job description." Laughter again, but his eyes didn't quite match the humor in his voice. Jimmy pressed on. No, I mean like at the CMAs a couple years ago. Someone said you were a little tipsy when you accepted your award." The crowd giggled, but Blake's jaw tightened. "Yeah," he said slowly, "and someone also said I was abducted by aliens once." "Doesn't make it true." His tone was calm, but the edge was noticeable now. Jimmy, sensing tension but refusing to let it go, tried to turn it into another joke. "Come on, Blake, you've got that reputation for being the fun guy, the life of the party. People love that about you." Blake leaned back, crossing his arms. "Yeah, well, there's a fine line between being the life of the party and being the punchline, Jimmy. I've worked too hard to end up the latter." The audience fell into an awkward silence. Jimmy blinked, caught off guard. "Hey, I didn't mean anything by it. Just having fun." Blake nodded but didn't smile. "I know, but sometimes, fun can sound a lot like disrespect, depending on who's listening." The atmosphere shifted. The playful energy that had filled the studio minutes earlier was gone. Blake's fans in the audience exchanged uneasy glances. Jimmy, trying to recover, quickly moved to another topic, Blake's relationship with Gwen Stefani. All right, Jimmy said, laughing nervously. "Let's talk about Gwen. You two seem to be doing great. I have to say, she's really done wonders for your image." That was the moment everything changed. The audience chuckled, but Blake didn't. His expression hardened as he stared at Jimmy, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "My image," he repeated quietly. "Yeah," Jimmy said, smiling like it was harmless fun. "You know, she's a pop icon. You were this rough country boy, and now suddenly you're, what do they call it, fashionable. She cleaned you up." Blake's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the host. "Jimmy," he said slowly, "you're a smart guy. But maybe, you should think before you start saying my girlfriend's the reason I'm worth interviewing." The air grew thick. Jimmy opened his mouth to reply, but Blake continued before he could. "I didn't come here to have my life turned into a late-night sketch. I came here to talk about my music, not to be mocked." The studio was silent now. Even Jimmy looked unsettled, his grin faltering. "Blake, come on, it's all jokes, man." Blake stood, unclipping his mic with calm precision. "You know what, man? I'm good. You want jokes, make 'em without me." The mic dropped onto the couch with a soft thud, echoing louder than any sound in the room. Blake straightened up, adjusted his jacket, and looked directly at Jimmy. "You want views, you got them." And with that, he turned and walked off stage, leaving behind a stunned audience and a visibly shaken host. The studio froze for several seconds before Jimmy stammered, "We'll be right back after this." The show cut to commercial, and the control room erupted into chaos. Producers scrambled, crew members whispered, and the audience murmured in disbelief. No one had ever seen Blake Shelton like that, so controlled, yet so visibly furious. Backstage, Blake's team was waiting. His manager tried to calm him down, urging him to let it go, but Blake was done. "I've taken jokes my whole life," he said, pacing back and forth, his face red but his voice steady. "But when someone crosses that line, when they make it personal, I'm not playing along anymore." His team didn't argue. They knew better. Within minutes, social media exploded. Hashtags like hashtag Blake Shelton storms off and hashtag Kimmel Clash trended worldwide. Clips of Blake's walk-off flooded X, TikTok, and YouTube. Fans split into camps, some defending him fiercely, others accusing him of overreacting. One clip in particular went viral. The moment Blake leaned forward and said, "There's a fine line between being the life of the party and being the punchline." It was shared thousands of times, praised for its raw honesty. Back in his dressing room, Blake sat quietly, scrolling through the chaos online. He sighed, shaking his head. "Guess that's what happens when you speak your mind," he muttered. A crew member knocked softly on the door, letting him know his car was ready. Blake grabbed his hat, nodded, and walked out without another word. That night, while Jimmy Kimmel Live aired an edited version of the interview, fans noticed something off: the abrupt cut, the missing exchange, the tension that still lingered in Jimmy's voice. It was clear something had gone wrong, and everyone knew it had to do with Blake Shelton. As Blake's car pulled away from the studio, he gazed out the window at the Los Angeles skyline, the city lights blurring against the dark. He wasn't angry anymore, just disappointed. In all his years in the business, he'd faced critics, rumors, and jokes, but he'd always handled them with grace. Tonight, though, something inside him had snapped. Not because of the jokes, but because of the disrespect beneath them. And as his phone buzzed with calls from reporters and producers, Blake ignored them all. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and said softly to himself, "Sometimes walking off is the only way to stand tall." The morning after the infamous walk-off, the entertainment world was in full meltdown mode. Every major outlet, TMZ, Entertainment Tonight, Billboard, and People, had the same headline plastered across their homepages: Blake Shelton storms off after heated clash with Jimmy Kimmel. Clips of the moment were everywhere. On TikTok, the video had over 10 million views by sunrise. Fans argued endlessly in the comments. Some said Blake had been disrespected, others claimed he'd overreacted. Memes surfaced, debates flared, and country music. Fans rallied behind their star with a vengeance. Blake, meanwhile, was sitting quietly on the porch of his ranch in Oklahoma, far away from the noise of Los Angeles. He held a mug of coffee in one hand and stared out across the acres of land that rolled into the horizon. The morning sun bathed the fields in gold, and the faint sound of birds was the only thing breaking the silence. He hadn't said a word publicly since the incident. His phone had been buzzing non-stop, calls from his management, texts from friends, even a few messages from other celebrities, but he ignored them all. Gwen had flown back to California the night before for work, but she'd left him a note on the counter that simply read, "Don't let them twist who you are. You did the right thing." For a moment, he smiled at her words. Then he sighed. "Right thing," he murmured. "Sure doesn't feel like it." Inside, his manager, Craig, was pacing by the window, phone pressed to his ear. "No, we're not doing Good Morning America." "No comment. Just give it a few days," he said before hanging up and turning to Blake. "Buddy, the internet's eating this up." Kimmel's team released a statement last night, said it was just a misunderstanding. "They're calling it playful banter gone too far." Blake raised an eyebrow. "Playful? Huh, that's one word for it." He took another sip of coffee, unbothered. "What do they want from me?" "They want you to come back on the show," Craig replied cautiously. "Jimmy wants to clear the air live on TV. Says it'll be good publicity for both of you." Blake let out a low laugh and shook his head. "So now it's about publicity." "Figures." Craig hesitated. "Look, man, people love you. But this thing's blowing up. You've got two choices. Ignore it and let them spin it, or own it and tell your side." Blake stared off into the distance for a long moment. The wind rustled through the grass, and a distant tractor hummed somewhere down the road. "I'll think about it," he said finally. By noon, the world had already moved to its next phase of drama. Jimmy Kimmel addressed the situation on his show, trying to play it off with humor. "In case you missed it," he said to laughter, "Blake Shelton stormed off my show last night. Apparently, I'm scarier than Miranda Lambert." The audience chuckled, but the tension was still there. Jimmy continued, "All jokes aside, Blake's a good guy. We just had a misunderstanding. He's welcome back anytime, as long as he brings some whiskey." It was damage control, but not everyone bought it. On social media, fans called out the fake apology, demanding Jimmy issue a real one. Blake stayed silent for another full day, but on the third morning, he decided to speak. He opened his phone and recorded a short video message, sitting on his porch, hat pulled low against the sun. "Hey, y'all," he began, his tone calm and sincere. "I've been seeing all the talk about what happened the other night. Look, I don't hold grudges, and I don't hate anybody. But I do believe in respect. Jokes are part of what I do, I can take 'em, but there's a line between having fun and putting someone down. I've spent years working to get where I am, and I'm proud of it. I just want folks to know that when you see me walk off a stage, it's not out of anger, it's out of self-respect." He ended with a small grin. "And Jimmy, if you're watching, next time, I'll bring the whiskey, but you're pouring." He posted it to X and Instagram, and within an hour, it was everywhere. The response was overwhelming. Fans flooded the comments with love and support. Fellow country stars chimed in too. Luke Bryan wrote, "You said what needed to be said, brother." Reba McEntire posted, "There's power in walking away." Even Gwen Stefani reshared the post with a heart emoji and the caption, "That's my man." The tide turned quickly. Public opinion shifted almost overnight. News outlets that had initially framed Blake as unprofessional began praising his composure and honesty. Editorials appeared with headlines like, "Blake Shelton shows how to stand up without losing your cool." Even Rolling Stone published a feature about the night country's good guy drew the line. Still, Jimmy Kimmel's camp continued pushing for reconciliation. 2 days later, a producer called again, offering to set up a virtual interview. "We'll let you lead the conversation," they promised. "You can say whatever you want, no scripts." Blake thought about it. Part of him wanted to just move on. But another part, the side of him that hated leaving things unfinished, knew he had to face it. "All right," he said, "let's do it, but on one condition, no games." The following week, the much-anticipated segment aired. Jimmy looked slightly nervous as he introduced the video call. "Joining us from Oklahoma, please welcome Blake Shelton." The audience applauded. Blake appeared on the screen, smiling faintly. "Hey there, Jimmy." "Hey, buddy," Jimmy replied, his tone more cautious than usual. "So, it's been a wild few days." "Yeah," Blake said with a half-smile. "Guess we gave the internet something to do." The crowd laughed, easing the tension. Jimmy nodded. "I want to start by saying I'm sorry if I crossed a line. I joke for a living, and sometimes I forget there's a person behind the punchline." Blake nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, I know you're a funny guy, and I respect what you do. But when it gets personal, especially when it involves the people I care about, that's when it stops being fun. I'm not mad, just wanted to make that clear." The crowd applauded softly. Jimmy smiled. "Fair enough. For the record, you're always welcome back here. And I promise next time, no jokes about Gwen, unless she's here to laugh at me too." Blake laughed genuinely this time. Deal. By the time the interview ended, both men were smiling. The internet exploded again, but this time with positivity. Fans praised both for handling the situation with maturity. Headlines read, "Blake Shelton and Jimmy Kimmel make peace live on air." Even critics who had mocked the original walk-off admitted the resolution felt real. Later that night, back on his ranch, Blake sat with a glass of bourbon and looked out over the quiet fields. His phone buzzed again, a text from Gwen, "Proud of you, cowboy." He smiled, took a sip, and finally felt the weight of the week lift off his shoulders. It had been a stormy few days, but in the end, Blake knew he hadn't lost his temper, he'd simply found his voice. And as he sat there under the fading Oklahoma sky, the hum of crickets filling the air, he thought about how sometimes, walking away doesn't mean giving up. Sometimes, it's the strongest thing a man can do.